Hello students, welcome to our afternoon read aloud. For today I thought it would be fun to go back a little bit and remind ourselves of a character we met and learned a lot about, Paul Bunyan, right? And so here I have A Tall Tale retold and illustrated by Steven Kellog. Some of you might recognize or think that the illustrations here on the cover are a little similar to, yes, this tall tale about Johnny Appleseed, again, retold and illustrated by Steven Kellog. So on the cover, there's so many details. I'm going to shift this a little bit so we can see really close up. There's Paul Bunyan. Oh, I see the blue ox babe. Lots of animals. And look how big he is. My goodness, he's sitting there. All those big wild animals are like little cats and kittens on his big body, right? And it looks like he's out in the wilderness, maybe out in the mountains. And then on the back, there's his buddy Babe, the blue ox, with some funny green glasses on. And there's an eagle. Let's take a look inside. Oh, so look at these end papers. Here you see Paul Bunyan. He's so big it takes two parents to carry him out of his house, right? And here there's a flag post, and the detail, it says, "The Bunyans welcome Paul, born July 4th, and it says he weighed 156 pounds. Wow. Okay, so those are some fun, I think, imagined details that the author illustrator put in there. Here we go. Paul Bunyan, A Tall Tale, retold and illustrated by Steven Kellog. Oh, look in there. He's so big, he can peek over the half door and see all the little kittens, even though he's just little. Oh, and on the dedication page, we can see Paul has jumped out of his cradle in the yard, and he's gone over to say hi to the big cow. And it looks like he has a bowl, maybe that he has the idea to fill with milk from the cow, from her udder, to give to the kittens. And his parents, his mom's like, "What?" Paul Bunyan was the largest, smartest, and strongest baby ever born in the state of Maine. Oh my gosh, he just picked the cow up and he's squirting the milk out for the kittens. Even before he learned to talk, Paul showed an interest in the family logging business. He took the lumber wagon and wandered through the neighborhood, collecting trees. Oh no! He just pulled up trees. That's not the right way to collect lumber, right? He's a little confused. He's little. Oh my goodness. There he's gone further off in the neighborhood, just pulling out a big tree. There were so many complaints about Paul's visits that his parents anchored his cradle in the harbor. So a harbor is a place where ships sit out in the water. And look, they made his cradle like a little boat and anchored him out there so he wouldn't get into trouble. All was well until Paul started rocking the cradle and stirring up waves. After his parents had paid for the damage, they decided to move to the backwoods where life would be more peaceful. Wow, and these books have so many lovely illustrations. It'd be great if you could maybe try to get it from the library yourself and enjoy looking up close at all the details. Paul loved his new wilderness home. He soon grew into a sturdy lad, that's another name for a boy, who was so quick on his feet he could blow out a candle and leap into bed before the room became dark. Do you think that's possible? To blow out a candle and jump into bed before it gets dark? Sounds a little exaggerated to me. Every day he joined his forest friends in their sports. He raced with the deer and wrestled with the grizzlies. One morning, Paul awoke to find the world under a blanket of blue snow. He heard a moan from inside a snowdrift, and there he found a shivering ox calf. Paul adopted him and named him Babe. Both Paul and Babe began growing at an astonishing rate, but The ox never lost the color of the snow from which he'd been rescued. As the years passed, the two of them proved to be extremely helpful in the family business. Oh, they're so big and strong, it's easy for them to help with heavy work. At 17, Paul grew a fine beard, which he combed with the top of a pine tree. By this time, other settlers were beginning to crowd into the Maine woods. Paul felt an urge to move on. He said goodbye to his parents and headed west. Paul wanted to cross the country with the best lumbering crew available. He hired Ole, a celebrated blacksmith, and two famous cooks, Sourdough Slim and Cream Puff Fatty. Then he signed up legendary lumbermen like Big Tim Burt, Hard Jaw Murphy, and the 7 Hackett brothers. Wow, I'm remembering some of the other stories where people did have nicknames, right? In the Wild West, people had nicknames sometimes based on what they looked like or maybe what their jobs were, what they were really good at. And notice the symbol of the settlers traveling west, the covered wagon, right? We've talked about that. Paul put the camp buildings on wheels so that Babe could haul them from one forest to another. As soon as he cleared the land, pioneers moved in to set up farms and villages. On the far slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, several of Paul's men were ambushed by a gang of underground ogres called the Gumbaroos. Paul grabbed the camp dinner horn and blew a thunderous note into the Gumbaroos' cave, determined to blast the meanness right out of them. Oh, wow. You can look up close. Look, there's a Gumbaroo kidnapping one of his men. To Paul's dismay, the Gumbaroos responded by snatching the entire crew. A wild rough and tumble rumpus began inside the den. Oh, wow. So Paul started a fight with the Gumbaroos by blowing the horn, but of course he needed to get all his men back. When the historic tussle was over, the Gumbaroos needed 6 weeks to untangle themselves. Oh, look how he tied them all up in knots. They disappeared into the depths of the earth, and they've never been heard from since. Paul's next job was to clear the heavily forested Midwest. He hired armies of extra woodsmen and built enormous new bunkhouses. Bunkhouses? They look like apartment buildings. The men sailed up to bed in balloons and parachuted down to breakfast in the morning. Unfortunately, the cooks couldn't flip flapjacks fast enough to satisfy all the newcomers. Oh, they can't make pancakes fast enough. To solve the muddle, Paul built a colossal, that means super huge, flapjack griddle. The surface was greased by kitchen helpers with slabs of bacon laced to their feet. Oh my goodness. So Paul had to build a giant flapjack griddle, and there the cooks put some bacon on their feet, and they're skating around to spread the bacon fat on the griddle. Every time the hot griddle was flooded with batter, it blasted a delicious flapjack high above the clouds. Usually the flapjacks landed neatly beside the griddle, but sometimes they were a little off target. Paul took a few days off to dig the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes so that barges of Vermont maple syrup could be brought to camp. Oh, so he dug some lakes so that the barges could come along and bring supplies. Fueled by the powerful mixture of flapjacks and syrup, the men leveled, that means they made flat, the Great Plains and shaved the slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They probably would have sawed the peaks themselves into logs if a blizzard hadn't suddenly buried the entire mountain range. So notice they're changing the American landscape, right? The blizzard continued for several years, snuffing out the spring, summers, and autumns. The crew burrowed into their bunkhouses and hibernated. Babe became so depressed that Paul asked Ole to make a pair of sunglasses for his friend. When Babe saw the world colored green, he thought he'd stumbled into a field of clover. He began eating the snow with such gusto that soon the treetops appeared. At that point, all those pent-up springtime simply exploded, dissolving the storm clouds and the remaining snow. Paul and his friends invited some newly arrived settlers to join them in a celebration of all the holidays that had been missed. So, can you believe that? Babe ate up all the snow because he thought it was grass, and that made the season change. That made the spring come. So, they celebrated all the holidays they had missed. Let's see. I see some Halloween. I see some Thanksgiving. I see some Valentine's Day with hearts. Oh, I bet there's a lot more too. Oh, there's Christmas. So many holidays. They had to make them all up at once. After the festival, the lumberjacks continued their journey. I bet they're going westward, right? But as they headed southwest, the blistering sun and the giant Texas varmints proved to be more of a problem than they had expected. Travel became so difficult that some of the men began to speak longingly of being buried by a blizzard or bear hugged by a gumbaroo. So it got so hot and terrible, they started to worry and not feel good. While crossing Arizona, the griddle curled up like a burned leaf and the batter evaporated. Deprived of their flapjacks, the lumbermen became weak and discouraged. Paul's great axe fell from his shoulder, gouging a jagged trench, which today is known as the Grand Canyon. Disaster seemed certain until Paul came up with a desperate plan. He headed east and found a family that could sell him a barn filled with corn. Babe galloped it back and across the desert. When the flaming sunrise hit that barn, it exploded, and the lumbermen awoke to find themselves in a raging blizzard of popcorn. Dizzy with joy, they pulled on their mittens and began blasting each other with popcorn balls. So they were happy with the food, but they also pretended it was like making a snow fight with popcorn. A westerly wind kept the cooling clouds of popcorn swirling around Paul and his crew until they crossed California and reached the Pacific Ocean. Oh my gosh. And he's so big, so they're swimming in the Pacific, and he's so big he's picking up a whale. After he had crossed the country, some say Paul gave up lumbering and rambled north searching for new areas of untouched wilderness. With the passing years, Paul has been seen less and less frequently. However, along with his unusual size and strength, he seems to possess an extraordinary longevity. That means it seems like he's lived a super long time. Sometimes his great bursts of laughter can be heard rumbling like distant thunder across the wild Alaskan mountain ranges where he and Babe still roam. Wow. And the end. And here on the end, it shows the land cleared by Paul Bunyan and Babe. So this is like a map. I wish I could get this open, but I can't. So this is like a map showing the United States. And here's north, south, east, west. And it's showing how they traveled across all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And it's got little cartoons and drawings about their adventures in different places. And the idea is that as they traveled west, right, they changed the American landscape. Now, do you think they really made the Grand Canyon with his axe dragging along, made the Grand Canyon? Do you think that Paul was actually able to dig the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River? I'm not sure. What do you think? Anyway, lots of connections there. Connections to our learning about traveling west, changing the American landscape, symbols like covered wagons. Those are all the things I want to make sure that you're paying attention to. You're not just word detectives like in our message, this morning. You're detectives of everything you read, and I hope you're always stopping to think. I hope you have a great afternoon. Don't forget to keep washing your hands, cover your coughs and sneezes, do some reading, do some writing, help your family around the house, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye.